Welcome back to our journey through Proverbs. Last time we finished verses 8 and 9, and so we're going to continue to walk through this chapter. We talked about how Solomon in this section was laying down a foundation, for a foundation in reference to the kind of wisdom foundation that a family ought to lay down, that encourages a posture of humility and concerning the transformative power of those foundational teachings when they persevere over time. And actually, as we continue into this section, let's just notice those first two verses, verses 10 and 11. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie and wait for blood. And it goes on, right? We have a very clear tone transition that we've moved from sort of a positive encouragement to a negative warning, right? That we've laid the foundation, which is what we were talking about, what mothers and fathers do, right? But he's laid this foundation that, hey, if you hear what I've said, and even, right, hearing what I've said could go back to what he's already said in the first verses 1 through 7, right? And so we potentially have a reference back to that, and he's continuing to build. He's constantly modeling for us, which is really, really beautiful, what he's teaching. So he's laid this foundation and he's talked about what it'll be like to persevere. And now it's almost like we have an implicit because, right? Why do you need this foundation? And I'll just remind us, right, that the foundation goes back up to verses 1 to 7. Why do you need this foundation? Because sinners are going to entice you, right? Solomon's sort of painting this bubble, right? About the family dynamic. But then, why is this dynamic important? It's because it won't always be so easy. Sinners are going to entice you. And so if sinners entice you, do not consent. Okay, let's go ahead and read this section again, 10 through 19, and then we'll return to our normal conversational process, right, of working through each verse and asking it questions. But I just wanted to go ahead and set that up since we'd already talked about verses 8 and 9 in another video. It is laying this really cool framework for how we're going to move forward. Again, modeling. But let's go ahead and read together, starting at verse 11. If they come with us, let us lie and wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. This is a really solemn warning. And it might be easy to think, oh, well, I'm not lying in wait for blood. I'm not ambushing the innocent. But I think as we continue to explore this, we're going to find that it is really, really applicable to our own lives. And it's not just if you're, being tempted into some sort of gang membership, right? Or highway robbery. That's not the only thing he's talking about. Okay, so, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. All right, so let's just get some word clarity here. What does it mean to entice? What does it mean to consent? Okay. So enticing, I think the first word that comes to my mind, right, is tempting. If they tempt you, but I think here's the real trick, right? can you be enticed towards something you aren't potentially already inclined to do, right? Something that maybe some little part of you actually does want. I think part of the trick of enticing and tempting is maybe the same thing, but maybe particularly with this word enticing, that this is something you kind of want. There's a desire already involved. I think sometimes we think of tempting as a rousing desire in us. That maybe it wasn't there, but then we see the option and now it's like, oh, maybe we do want this. And maybe enticing is that, right? And I'm switching these, and tempting is the other. But I think the distinction here is that desire can be aroused in us that we didn't already have, but it can also just be drawn out, right? That was the desire that was in there, and it can be teased out, gently pulled out, those sorts of desires that we hide, that we keep really deep inside. An enticement seems like something that's just gently pulling on that thing, right? And when you think about that, that idea of pulling, I think of a thread, right? So we have maybe a blanket or a rug, and it has one, or a sweater, I guess, would maybe be a funny one too. But it has one loose thread. And that loose thread, right, is maybe the desire we know we should hide, we know we shouldn't give in to. But the enticer, the enticement, the sinner, begins to pull on that thread. Right? And as you pull on that thread, it begins to unweave and unravel. It begins to make space in, holes in the thing that it's being pulled from. And of course, the thing that it's being pulled from is you. And it's amazing how our desires can unravel us so quickly. And that's why we must not consent. Do not consent. Well, what is consent? Right? It's giving in. It's not resisting. But, perhaps more importantly, it's saying, yes, do this. Right? Or, yes, I'm going along with this. So consent is basically, I think, your yes. And, in this context, there is an implicit consent, right? If you do nothing and you just sort of go with the flow and go along for the ride, that is your implicit consent. Your explicit consent would be to say, yes, keep pulling on that thread. I want this. I want to, you may not think you're unraveling. You may think you're revealing a new pattern or something, or you may not care what's going on. But Solomon knows that it is very important you do not give your yes. Because if you don't, right, if these guys are pulling on you and you haven't given your consent, there's potential to cut it off, right? The consent can be consent can be an encouragement to the sinner, right? To keep doing what they're doing. Yeah, I like this, or yeah, I kind of want this. Or you cannot consent, and that kind of becomes like your scissors. You can cut off that thread, and they can't pull it anymore, right? But that's the power of your consent, and that's why you can't just give it. Because if you give it, right, then there's no stopping it. You've thrown away the scissors, and now we're just pulling, and you're going to unravel. But then we start to get into the nuances of what are these sinners asking, right? Maybe it's not so easy to tell when you are being enticed. Maybe it's not so easy to tell who the sinner that's trying to unravel you is. And so he's giving us some warning signs of the sorts of things they might say. If they say, "Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, we shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, we all have one purse." Okay, so we have the pitch, right? The sales pitch. Of the sinner. And we kind of have two key questions that we can probably answer at the same time, at least the questions that pop into my mind, which are, and maybe it's three, but the first one is, why is this enticing? Right? Why is this an effective sales pitch? Then why these things? And maybe there wasn't a third one. Or maybe I'll think of it as we go. Why these things? And so I think we can kind of maybe answer these individually as we go. So if they say, "Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, we shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us, we all have one purse." Okay, so let's maybe identify the sections here. It seems, so there's a call to come. So this is maybe section 1. There's a call to come. Let us, okay, there's two let us here. So we'll maybe this is one section. Let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. So there's the come. There's the let us. Like Sheol, oh, there's another let us. Let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. Okay. So it seems like there's maybe about 4 sections. We could maybe subdivide. But I think we'll have 4 sections to work with. So come with us. There's some irony here. I mean, this is kind of a twisted version of what we've already talked about, where there's sort of this call to adventure in the journey of wisdom, right? In the puzzling analogy we talked about, where there's sort of an infinite puzzle, there's an infinite horizon of becoming more wise. And when they say, "Hey, come with us," it's like, "Hey, come on an adventure with us," right? So it's a false call to adventure. Adventure and companionship, right? Come with us. Hey, come join the group. Like, hey, we're just going to go have some fun. A false call to adventure and companionship. Right? And adventure and companionship are both things we want in life, but this isn't going to be the way to get it. But that's why it's enticing, right? So why these things? Well, everyone wants adventure and companionship. Why is it enticing? Because everyone wants adventure and companionship, right? An adventure only gets better when you get to do it with other people who are going the same direction, doing the same kinds of things. But then you'd think they kind of ruin it when they say, "Hey, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason." It's like, okay, that's a little weirder, right? Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. This one probably throws me more than any of the rest of them. I think, if we when we start to talk about goods and plunder and throwing in your lot one person, I think we're going to have some clarity there of, well, why is this enticing? Why might they make this their sales pitch? But this is, I don't know, this is kind of odd. Why? Why are people inclined to be enticed by lying in wait for blood, ambushing the innocent without reason, swallowing them alive? Mm. Okay. So maybe there's something with lying in wait. Okay. Right? And that lying in wait and ambush are very similar things. They're sort of parallel things. So lying in wait and ambush, maybe something to do with, this might be too loose a connection, but this is not work. Right? Why might this be enticing? It's not really work. It's lying down. And that's pretty enticing, right? If I can get things that I want without working, that's a pretty interesting sales pitch for most of us. And so this lying in wait and ambush is maybe sort of the frame that it's like, oh, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason, right? It's like, oh, there's this thing I kind of want, but it's tinged with this thing maybe I know I shouldn't want. But having said that, right, there's an enticement here, but the reality is I think there is actually an enticement for blood. If you think about something like the Colosseum, right, and that's sort of the most recognizable historical example. There's lots of others in other cultures, right? But people enjoy bloodshed when it's sort of performative, right? I mean, I don't really have to reach back to the Colosseum, do I? Right? Action movies. We enjoy bloodshed when it's performative, right? When it's part of a story, when it's part of a drama, when it's part of a form of entertainment, right? And so we're not working, and bloodshed is kind of a form of human entertainment. It's not something we should be proud of, but it's just the way it is. And when I do think about the Colosseum, I think about how Christians were killed in it, right? Christians who had done nothing wrong except to be Christians, and they were killed, right? The innocent were ambushed without reason, without real reason, for the sake of the empire and the entertainment of the crowds, of the masses. So this lying in wait for blood, you're not working and you're getting entertained. And, without being overly political, I think a temptation to not work and to be entertained is probably stronger in our society than maybe at any other time in the world, right? That this enticement, is so readily available. You could click off this video and go to any number of other sources of entertainment, and they could entertain you for hundreds and hundreds, thousands, if millions of hours, right? They could entertain you for your whole life. And if you didn't have to work, you could actually just spend your entire life being entertained. It wouldn't be fulfilling, right? Wouldn't be useful, purposeful, or impactful, but you could do it. And that's what this temptation is. To not work, for your wealth to come from sources that aren't yourself, and then to be entertained, by what you do. Entertained while you lie in wait. And when we go back to verse 12, like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. Again, I'm not 100% confident that I'm not stretching a little too much. But let us swallow them alive. It just makes me think of the stomach. Like consuming. That's what it makes me think of. And like I said, I might be stretching a little bit here. But when you think of swallowing them alive, swallowing them whole, makes me think of the stomach, and that makes me think of consumption, right? And we're a consumer society. We are. Right? There's no denying that. I'm I'm recording this the Monday after Thanksgiving, which is now Cyber Monday. And Black Friday this last week was not just Black Friday, it was Black Friday week. And at some places it was Black Friday month, right? Consumerism is just a part of America at this stage in the game. And, maybe always, but that's not a conversation we need to have at the moment. But these temptations are not just, like I said at the beginning, they're not the kinds of temptations that tempt only, bad guys. These are the temptations of the average human person. It's tempting to not work. It's tempting to go on an adventure of not working and entertainment so that you can consume those things that you want to consume that you didn't have to work for, right? That you didn't have to sacrifice for. But, right, there's always this cost that someone had to pay it, right? Your ambush was on the innocent. And when you swallow, they're consumed. But let's move on to number 3. And we shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder, right? So this last section, So number 1 had an inversion in it, right? Of the sort of call of the Proverbs. The call of the Proverbs to adventure and to an infinite horizon, and the false call of adventure and companionship. And then lying in wait and ambushing, swallowing, all these things. I wonder, are they an inversion? I need to go back and look at verse 1. Yeah, they totally are. Right? Chapter 1, to receive instruction in wise dealing. Remember that relational concept we talked about? So this is totally an inversion of that wise dealing in relationship, and especially the wise dealing in relationship with people who don't have what you have, right? So the wise person begins to take care of the simple, but this person does the opposite. It's an inversion. They kill the people who have what they want. So they are empty and they kill people to get what they want, right? We'll just say kill. They ambush people to get what they want because they don't have something that person has. Whereas the wise person gives away the thing that they have to people who don't have it. So this is an incomplete inversion of the wise path that we outlined in chapter 1. And so we shall find all precious goods, and we shall fill our houses with plunder. I think goods is maybe the most obvious temptation, right? If you do this, you get stuff. Stuff you want. It's valuable stuff. Or at least that's the claim, right? I'll put it in little quotations, right? It's valuable stuff. It's the kind of stuff you want. And we shall fill our houses with plunder, right? You'll never be in need. A pretty powerful temptation. And then throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. Again, I don't want to get overly political, but this is a fascinating temptation. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. They're trying to offer community, right? They're trying to offer a community that shares, that supports one another, right? But right, there's a catch, because what's binding this community when all they do is entertain themselves, hurt others to get what they want, to fill their own houses, right? To not work, to not really go on an adventure, to not have purpose. This is a return, right, to that false community. And the reason this is probably bookended, right? It's here and it's here. The reason it's probably bookended is because that desire for companionship really is so strong in us. I mean, we just want friends and loved ones so bad, because we're relational creatures. We're made for relationship, right? Relationship with God, but relationship with each other. And so this is something we really, really want. But this is just another inversion, right? Because like I said, what's binding them together? When you read this last verse, throw in your lot among us, we all have one purse. What's crazy is that could be the Acts 2 church, right? The church that had everything in common, that always ate together, that always did everything together. That could be the Acts 2 church saying that, hey, come join us. We all have one purse. It's like, oh, wow, that sounds really good. I'd like to be a part of that. Except the problem is, they're not bound to one another by the power of the Holy Spirit, like Acts 2 church is, right? By a common purpose, by a common goal. The only goal of these people is, well, yeah, we'll have to get to this in the next video, but the primary goal of these people is, where is it in this verse? Oh yeah, there it is. Greedy for unjust gain. They're just greedy. Just greedy for things they didn't work for things they want, and they're not willing to do what they need to do to have it. And that's always a temptation for humans. That always, right? I mean, we'll never truly escape that temptation to shortcut, to get what we want without having to do the work to get it. And so this sales pitch, why these things? Why is this enticing? I mean, I think we began to unpack that, but this is primarily an inversion of the wise path. Right? Solomon outlined an order of things in that first section of the introduction. Right? He outlined an order of things. He talked about community. He talked about how the wise are going to help the simple and the youth, and right, there's going to be this cycle of growing up and then becoming that person who then helps, right? And it's all about a relational giving of the Spirit, giving of the wisdom that you gain. And that's the kind of transformation that happens in the life of a wise person and in a community of wise people. But there is work involved, right? There's progress, there's purpose, there's movement forward, there's something beyond your own desires, there's dealing with one another well. There's all these things that bind in a wise community. And this is the opposite of all that. The sales pitch is so effective is because it offers the same kinds of things that wisdom offers, but with those devastating caveats, right? That, yeah, you can have community, but it's just sort of a group of people who all want things for themselves that are going to like stick together. So it's not really a community because they don't want something greater than themselves. And yeah, we're going to share the goods, but we're going to share the goods that we got from people that we stole it from, goods that we didn't work for, right? We're going to go on an adventure together, but that actual adventure is just laying down and being entertained, right? And that's a subpar adventure. That's not the kind of adventure I want to go on, right? It's the kind of adventure that I have to fight against each and every day because I am tempted by things like YouTube and the learning and education and entertainment that we can access. Uh, and so, as we begin to wrap up this section, verses 10 through 14, this sale pitch of the sinner, right? We can remind ourselves that this is enticing because they're pulling on actual desires of our heart. And when we talked about this earlier, we're like, well, maybe they're in there, maybe they're not. Actually, no, all of these desires are in our heart, all of them. But they're pulling at them towards into a direction, right, that is not going to produce any fruit. It's not going to actually have a positive transformational effect on our lives. And so that's why we can begin to unravel if we give our consent, if we give our yes, right, and we don't cut it off. And then we had this sales pitch, and the whole thing is an inversion of what wisdom is offering. It's a call to adventure and companionship, to not working, to entertainment, right, to getting what you want, but not through the proper means. It's to consumption, to getting what is valuable, to not be in need, and to have community, right? But all of these things are just an inversion of what the wise path gives you, and they come with those caveats where if you go down this path, you actually won't be fulfilled. You actually won't get the things that they promise because it's a sales pitch. It's a sales pitch because if they just offered you the real thing, you wouldn't want it. So they have to sell you on it. The Proverbs version, the wisdom version, is not a sales pitch because they don't need to sell you on it because it's what you should want. And they're not going to try and force you or manipulate you into doing that. But the sinner has to entice you, right? The wise man, the sage, doesn't have to entice you because he actually has something good. And if you see the goodness, you'll want it. But the sinner has to sell. And I think I will write that down. And with that, I hope to see you on the next stage of our journey, looking at verses through 15 through 19, and we may perhaps actually finish the chapter in that video. So, hope to see you there.